Hi, this video is going to be a double response. That is, I had two comments in my video where I talked about how to avoid problem players and game masters before they get to your gaming table. And I think those comments were quite interesting because at first you look at them and they are like funny comments, but there is greater value to them, in my opinion. These comments were written by Chiva Monger and Jedak. One comment has to do with solo role playing games, and the other has to do with what I mentioned about hair in that video. So let's start with Chiva Monger's comment about long hair. I'm going to put a link in the description to that video. In that video, basically, I said how long hair could help you be more perceptive. Perhaps some of you have not experienced or experimented rather with long hair and perception and all of that. Supposedly, it works as a sort of as antennae to be more aware of your surroundings and such. So definitely take a look at that video where I talk a bit about that. And so basically, like I said, the premise is that long hair, it gives you certain benefits related to health, awareness. Some say that the long hair gives you a certain psychic quality. If you don't think those things are actually possible, you could use this material as fictional material for your role-playing games. But I said that long hair has so many benefits. So Chivamonger mentioned how there was this stereotype of the Ubermensch hipster, because hipsters, hippies, they have really long hair. And he also mentioned how, yes, in some traditions you can see that supposedly the long hair connects directly to your crown chakra. That's why it obtains the energy of the sun, and it channels it directly to your crown chakra according to that. That's why, for example, long beards aren't exactly as well regarded when it comes to long hair. Take a look at those heroes of old, like, for example, Samson from the Bible, or rather the Tanakh. But maybe some people do not know this, but the Bible as we know it, it's actually the Jewish Tanakh with the New Testament put into it as Christian propaganda. And there are other heroes you have seen, Kuhulin. Some would say, although that's not, he didn't have so much hair, but Alexander the Great, etc. We will see many warriors in history and mythology of old that they had a pretty long hair, if not incredibly long, at least it got to shoulder length, supposedly. I will let you to be the judge of that. So yes, how come hipsters or hippies or people with long hair do not have those special qualities? Well, one factor that and that's just based on my considerations. Perhaps the beard has something to do with it. I wonder if the beard interrupts the energetic process. The etheric charge is somewhat dispersed because when you try to let your hair grow, and this has been attempted in, for example, in wars. In the case of there was this, it's not the Thule Society, I think it was part of the Thule Society when it comes to, this is going to get me shadow banned, but okay, the Nazis and such, and they also tried to exploit this thing about long hair. Just take a look. I'm going to put a link in the description to a video where they talk about those women with very long hair. Let's see if YouTube hasn't taken it down. So yes, a lot of people have experimented with these things about the long hair, and you see the mythology of Samson in the Bible, that when his hair got cut off, he was very weak. So when it comes to hipsters or hippies or whatever, a lot of them, like I said, they let their beard grow out quite a bit. They let it as long as the hair on their heads. So maybe there is a sort of interruption, who knows? Another thing is that hipsters and hippies, they usually do drugs. So those substances could be affecting their brains negatively. So all of that awareness and supposedly enhanced intelligence and all of that, maybe those substances have damaged their brains so much that they simply cannot benefit from that. Their crown chakra has been, well, to say it in a certain way, either intoxicated or the energy channels to it, the meridians and all that, they have been interrupted by the actions of those substances. And even if they are not taking those substances that are illegal or prohibited in different parts of the world, a lot of them also take their pills and their capsules, all sorts of pharmaceuticals. Remember, pharmakos, human sacrifice, that's the Greek word of pharmakos. Pharmacology, the study of dark sorcery and poisons. So their brains are all messed up because of those chemicals. And that's why I say that a hipster is never going to become a Superman, because their brains are completely damaged. Now, Chivamonger also mentioned that how come monks, that, yes, the typical stereotype of the bald monk, or the monk that shaves his head completely, how come they are presented like that? Like, oh, they have like mystical powers and all of that. Well, I think there is a certain image, a certain propaganda that has been spread out, because it's quite flashy for video games, anime, manga, that you see this monk that is bald and he has access to some sorts of powers. But if you search look for different websites, or here in YouTube, you search for videos of people that have actually gone to those monasteries in the East, the Shaolin temples and such, you will see that there are many lies spread about the lifestyle of those monks. It's the typical, like those videos that they say, would Shaolin monks be able to work in a self-defense situation or against an MMA fighter, all of that. So there are some exaggerations. But let's say that there is actually some truth to it. Let's say that there is actually some sort of Shaolin monk with weird powers or something. You have to take into consideration that those monks, they dedicate the entirety of a single day, all of their days, they dedicate them to constant meditation, contemplation, exercises. They have a very strict control when it comes to the food that they eat. Not strict enough, in my opinion. But that means that if there is some truth that monks supposedly had some sort of special quality to them, it would be because of their constant exercises, contemplations, meditations, etc. But that's quite impossible for someone that is not dedicating their entire lives. Yeah, that someone is not willing to spend all of their time to those exercises, meditations. So it's much better to let your hair grow so that it absorbs the power of the sun. Spend some time under the sun so that it works like a sort of battery, because each hair works as a sort of energy cell. And that's why as you grow older, supposedly, when it is needed, the hair starts to become a bit white, because that way, without that pigmentation that serves as a sort of protection, that is, it keeps you from absorbing an excess of solar energy. This way, the white hairs, they are going to store more energy as needed. So yes, in the case of monks, if we are to believe that stereotype that the monk has some special powers, I think it will be because of that, Chivamonger, because the monk is dedicating his entire life to meditate and absorb that psychic energy, let's call it like that, or subtle energy. But there is also, like I said, it's truly a disadvantage when someone shaves their head completely. Take a look at those totalitarian nations, China, Korea. They are very strict. In some cases, they even forbid the wearing your hair long. They want you to shave your head completely because you are easier to manipulate. Just take a look at Genghis Khan. When he conquered a certain area, he made sure that all of the men and women had very short hair. That way they wouldn't benefit from the powers of long hair, and they would be quite docile. They would, in today's terms, they would believe the mainstream. They would be completely naive when it comes to the government, etc. So yes, those are my thoughts, Chivamonger. I think that's how the monk stereotype has survived because it's either exaggeration or they spend all of their time meditating to obtain those powers. But it's much more comfortable to let your hair grow long, obtain that power from the sun, and focus on other things. You can meditate, you can do exercises, but you can also work or participate in different hobby related activities, etc. Now let's move on to the comment by Jedak. He said, this is a funny comment at first glance because he said, how to avoid solo players and solo game masters. So it's quite silly on the surface because, well, you are your solo game master and your solo player. But there is some truth to this. Perhaps you want to avoid other solo players or other solo game masters that have nothing to do with your game. Because otherwise, why would you want to avoid them, right? But in some cases, maybe their styles, they clash so much with your methodology when running solo role-playing games that you simply want to avoid using their methods or techniques. Let's talk a bit about context when it comes to role-playing games and solo role-playing games specifically. I think solo role-playing games are still quite in their infancy because role-playing games were not originally conceived to be played as a solo experience. There have been some experiments throughout the years to come up with the best ways to run an RPG as a solo game. I think it all started, correct me if I'm wrong, but when it comes to role-playing games, you could say that Ken St. Andre and Rick Loomis, they were the pioneers when it comes to solo RPG adventures. Ken St. Andre created Tunnels and Trolls because he liked the concept of Dungeons and Dragons, but not the execution. So Ken St. Andre and Rick Loomis started to produce these solo modules that feel a bit like choose your own path, choose your own way, or choose your own adventure sort of game books. But because they are so well written, in my opinion, at least most of them, if not all of them, I like all of the Flying Buffalo modules that I have played so far. But like I said, because they are so detailed, sometimes you can easily fall into the illusion that you are playing a game with a game master. But they still feel a bit like those books, those choose your own adventure books. But later on, and again, I'm not the most knowledgeable historian, but as I understand it, the Mythic Game Master emulator was somewhat of an innovation because it presented a viable way to take any role-playing game and play it without the need for a module. But like with normal role-playing games, with role-playing games that you play with your group, even though the fathers of those concepts played the games in a certain way, it doesn't mean that that's the best way to do it. So I think there is an important avoidance when it comes to avoiding some tendencies or perhaps even biases of yourself that you get too boxed into a certain methodology to run things. If it works for you, that's great, but I think it's also a good idea to add some elements, oracles, tables, emulators that you find throughout your gaming career to see if you can boost or enhance your methodology. And in the case of other solo role players, maybe you want to avoid their methods, their techniques, because they clash so much with your own ideas of how a solo role playing game should proceed. For example, I'm going to give you mention this solo philosopher, perhaps you could call him, because I think his content is good, but it clashes completely with my own. This is Kenny Norris. I think his YouTube channel is still up. I'm going to put a link in the description to his channel. I recommend that you watch his videos and that he has published some PDFs in Drive-Thru RPG where he talks about the philosophy, the methods, the techniques of solo gaming, solo RPGs, but they clash completely with my own methods. It was still very beneficial that I watched his videos and I read his documents, because it allowed me to identify the things that I actually like of solo role-playing games. But like I said, his methodology has a lot to do with playing a session as if it was some sort of staged play. So there are different things that are spoiled from the very beginning. He follows quite the structural or sequential approach when it comes to the events, the things that are happening in a solo RPG. And I prefer it when things are a bit more spontaneous. When I am running things without a pre-generated module or a solo module, I prefer things to be quite unpredictable, spontaneous, but he determines many things beforehand. And also, when it comes to the interpretation of different results, based on skill checks or oracles or tables that you are using, he actually recommends that you create a huge list of all of the different interpretations and that you use the best, yes, you use the best interpretation for the situation at hand. But in my case, I prefer to be, like I said, completely spontaneous. You have seen this in my videos of Abraham's method when I am running the solo module, the solo campaign from the ashes. When I obtain an interpretation, when I'm using the Game Master's Apprentice deck, I use the first thing that comes to my mind. So as you can see, my methods clash a lot with Kenny Norris's methods. So in a certain way, I avoid his teachings completely. So that's one way in which you can avoid solo game masters or solo players if they do not match with your own playing style. And when it comes to yourself, I think that one of the things that I enjoy most of solo RPGs is coming up with new ways of using oracles, emulators, tables. Sometimes I want to use a lot of them, so many of them at the same time. Other times I only use one or two, and other times I strike a bit of a balance. So I think that's very fun. It's very exciting for me when I purchase something from Ken Wickham, or when I obtained the solo adventuring toolkit, when I combine certain concepts with the Mythic Game Master emulator, with the conjectural emulator. There's just so much when it comes to solo material nowadays. We are truly blessed in that regard. So I'm always thinking, oh, how can I use this when it comes to interactions with non-player characters, when it comes to simulating their intelligence, their responses, their reactions? Or how am I going to use this to determine the next scene, the situations, the encounters that the character is going to face in this adventure, on his journey? And so all of that, I find it very exciting, very entertaining. But in order for me to come up with new ways, I have to abandon or discard or avoid my old ways of doing things. Perhaps just keeping those essential or fundamental things of handling things, of handling the adventures, the campaigns, etc. So yes, overall, I hope this video was entertaining, or it has some value to it when it comes to the information of running solo role-playing games. And in the case of long hair, well, I encourage everyone to let their hair grow as much as possible. I know that some people have suffered some damage because of toxic substances that they put into their bodies. and now they are completely bald. There is a way to restore that, but it requires discipline, the most pure, most natural, most beneficial meals. Yes, it requires a lot of discipline, but it is possible. So once again, thank you for watching this video, and thank you so much to those of you that have been supporting the channel by sending right through RPG gift certificates. If anyone else wants to further support the channel, the information on how to do that will be in the description below. Once again, thank you, and please share your comments, your thoughts and opinions on what I talked about today, and see you later.